Hey everybody, thanks for checking in this week. Welcome to another episode of the Manufacturing Stream podcast from L to L. I am Chris Rost, one of your co-hosts and content creator here at L2L. I am joined by Eric Whitley, who is the head of manufacturing solutions at L2L and also the other co-host and one of this week's experts for this episode of the Manufacturing Stream. We've also got Jim Mayer on the line. He is the founder of the Connected Manufacturer, but he's also joined us at L2L as one of our cultural ambassadors. So he's going to be a regular guest on these programs. You're going to hear from him a lot of great insights about culture on the shop floor, about how people are actually like moving and working and interacting with manufacturing tech and getting better at doing their jobs in the manufacturing industry. Eric, Jim, I'm going to pass the mic over to you briefly.
Yeah, Eric Whitley. I've been in manufacturing ever since I was a young man. Rebuilding torque converters in a transmission shop back in high school, all the way up to working through McDonnell Douglas. Was on the first flight team for the C-17 and MD-11. Moved up to Utah, went to go work for the startup company called Autoleave that invented actually the airbag in the car here in northern Utah where I live. And so been through that and then joined L2L. And so I've been here for 11 years doing manufacturing. I've taught total productive maintenance, taught leadership at Ohio State. Yeah, so anyways, a little bit about my background, why I'm here, and kind of the thought process around culture. So
that's awesome. I'm Jim Mayer. I've spent 20 plus years in manufacturing after building houses. Been in skilled trades since high school. Walked into my first machine shop early on in my career as a salesperson once I stepped out of the construction world. And I fell in love. The sights, the smells, the sounds. It took me back to shop class, which was the happy moments for me in high school. And so here we are, 20 years later. I've been on quite the journey. I've worked for nonprofits. I've worked for large companies, small companies, OEMs, distributors, end users. So been in all of these types of shops. The reason I'm here to be able to talk about this is what I studied and this is what I practiced. I've been a leader for the majority of my career in different forms, one way or the other, and have just really enjoyed the human side of manufacturing. I've never been the most technical. I'm the guy who can understand the things that a guy like Eric says when he's talking about being out on the shop floor, but I couldn't run a machine. I can build you a house, but I can't make you an airplane, and Eric is the opposite there. Oh, he may be able to build you a house too.
Nope, I'm wood stupid. I tell everybody I am wood stupid. For some reason, when you put a piece of wood in front of me, my brain turns left and goes down some winding road. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. It's like Bugs Bunny, a wrong turn at Albuquerque, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm actually trying to build a poker table in my garage right now, and I'm on Rev 3 probably, of cutting stuff up and throwing it away. And so anyways, trying to learn something new at 60, so
measure twice, cut once.
Yeah. I've tried that, Jim. It still doesn't work for some reason. The measure twice, cut once thing just is not getting it. So, yeah.
We can talk offline about angles and all of that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Do a seminar or something. Fantastic.
Right.
Well, I've gathered y'all here in this room today because if there's one thing that people are talking about, especially now in 2025, as we have a lot of younger people entering the workforce, as we have a lot of older people trying to navigate the manufacturing workforce, I think it's like time to continue talking about turnover and about the fact that people are leaving the manufacturing industry in droves. I have a stat here from Deloitte that says that over 80% of manufacturing professionals that they served in 2025 are reporting that high turnover is actively disrupting their production. And I have a sneaking suspicion that the number is actually higher than 80%, and that's just what they were able to record. And that LNS also reported that 84% of manufacturing leaders are just watching this loss of skilled workers negative impact almost every area of their operations. That's production, that's efficiency, that's quality, things like that. So I wanted to kind of open this up as a forum to talk about the human side of turnover. I think Especially in the last company I worked for, Swipe Guide, we talked a lot about closing skills gaps. We talked a lot about kind of these numbers focused angle of turnover and skills gaps from the manufacturer's side. Hey, how can we boost this? Upskilling, these reskilling initiatives. How do we keep people on to boost our numbers? But I think it's also time that we open it up and talk about it more from the human on the shop floor perspective, right? How can we as manufacturing leaders be actually supporting these people? What kind of resources can we give them? And how can we start to turn this around in a way that sticks? That lasts a long time, and that maybe takes a different tack to some of the things that we've been trying in the past. So I'll open it up to the two of you. I mean, do you agree with these stats? Is turnover really this big of an issue in the manufacturing industry? And, what kind of things have you seen in the last few years that might sound some alarm bells?
Go ahead, Jim.
Chris, I think this is a great topic, right? Because historically, a lot of manufacturers have looked at the skills gap strictly through that lens of retirements. They're not looking at it through the lens of turnover. And we really need to bring that light into it. It's not just the silver tsunami that's coming that we've known about for 2 decades, right? It's more than that. It's that turnover and what are employers doing to keep the people on the floor. I think the stats that you shared with us are probably very conservative in nature. I think that a lot of those studies, those surveys, are capturing the medium to enterprise size. I don't think they capture a lot of the small, very small segment size manufacturers, the places that have 15 to 50 employees, because we see a turnover statistic of 60-ish type percentage in those smaller shops. So I think that the overall sentiment is there and very valid, but I think it could be a little bit larger as far as that is concerned. So I'm really excited to have this conversation, flesh out some solutions. I do know Eric has some first-hand experience, though, in some of these challenges with his son. So I'm going to leave that was the only add I could make to this. I'm going to leave this one open to Eric.
I had and Chris, you saw this. I did a podcast with my eldest son here, this was a couple months ago, and talking about why he left manufacturing. I mean, he's a college graduate who had a very, very high-paying manufacturing job, very cool, high-paying manufacturing job, building rockets, and decided to go off. And one of the things that he told me is that it was just not challenging enough. It just did not challenge his intellect. He tells a great story about how he spent a month trying to get a TV in a boardroom, just stuff like that. You could go to Walmart and buy a 40-inch TV for $169, and here's this huge defense contractor and trying to get a TV into a boardroom so he could show his guys the metrics of what's going on. Just that type of stuff. But the one thing that I've been thinking about lately, and maybe this is because I'm taking on a little more of a role in sales, but the pipeline thought process is something to think about. What we're not doing is we're just not filling the pipeline of manufacturing employees early and often in manufacturing. And then we're not keeping those people engaged enough so that they stick around and make their way. I would think that if manufacturing starts to concentrate on getting people past that first year mark and making manufacturing as interesting as possible so that they could get beyond that first year mark, so they could see some type of path to growth, so they could see some type of path to movement up the management chain and a career path, is something that we've got to start working on with inside of manufacturing in order to make this stuff happen. So
yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, Eric, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. It's career pathing. It's how do we take the goals of the people that work for us and make sure that they understand what their future looks like. Make it more than just a job. So yeah, I love that.
One of the things I've been kind of talking about lately is that, I grew up in a very middle class family. My dad had a pretty decent job. He was a maintenance mechanic at a tire factory. And being a maintenance mechanic in a tire factory, he provided a home. At one point in time, we were able to put a swimming pool in our backyard. We took vacations. We did all of that, working as a maintenance person. So I don't know that a 25, 26, 27-year-old mother or a father who works in manufacturing can actually attach those dreams to their current job. Do they have those dreams? Do they have those things? How do we apply those to their personal lives and make this something that they can see that, hey, if I stick with this, I'm going to be able to provide my family a nice living. I'm going to be able to do the things I enjoy. I just don't see that in manufacturing anymore.
Yeah. I think we don't see that in a lot of the frontline industries. I think it extends past manufacturing. The economic climate and the way these jobs are structured these days, it doesn't work like that. My partner's a nurse, and she certainly can't attach those dreams to a single salary.
Right.
It's
right.
I think it extends. It might even be something deeper than just in the manufacturing industry. So I think that adds to our responsibility to bolster people like this in an industry and in a world where we might need to change the way that we think about this.
Yeah. And Chris, on that point, sorry to interrupt, but I think that it extends even beyond skilled trades and skilled careers and beyond that frontline employee. My wife is in law, right? And not a lawyer. She's a legal researcher. But I don't know if a paralegal, if a legal researcher, I don't know how many people can truly afford a single family income anymore outside of highly specialized, highly educated positions like doctors and lawyers, right? Or scientists. I think that has changed. And when we look at what has built the economic landscape in not only the US, but other developed countries, right? You look at Europe, you look at Canada, you look at these other developed countries, the middle class has always been that backbone. And traditionally skilled trades, manufacturing in particular, has been that prop for the middle class. It's been that pathway to the middle class, I guess is a better way to put it. But that isn't possible anymore. That dream of being able to have a home and you put in a swimming pool and take vacations every year and you've got a car or maybe two for the family of four, that does not exist anymore. And so I think that, yes, we've got to create these learning pathways. We've got to show career trajectory. We've got to connect the dots for people. But on a whole separate, maybe different episode we do together, we have to look at the way that we pay our employees and how do we make this not a race to the bottom for manufacturing as a whole.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So before we get too focused on the solutions here, I would also like to paint for our listeners a little bit of a backdrop. And we keep talking about a shift in focus and a shift in strategy. And I think it's important to touch on, why does that shift need to happen? What have we been doing up until this point as leaders in the manufacturing industry that isn't working? What have we been approaching as solutions that aren't landing with these people? Why is this turnover so high? What are some of the reasons behind that? And, why is this shift so necessary?
Eric, you got anything, or do you want me to jump in on this?
No, here's one of the issues is that, back, and I always do this as the gray-haired guy, back in my day, back when I was a pup, a long time ago. But, the one thing that we did is that people had roles. People had functions. And I always say that culture is the sum or the outcome of work processes and leadership. You can have good leadership and bad processes, culture sucks. You can have good processes, bad leadership, culture's going to suck, right? And so the combination of those two things is what brings about this frustration and the things that we have out on the shop floor. So So people used in the day, you knew what you did for a living. You knew what you had for a living. Now, though, in manufacturing, and I don't know if this is an automation issue or what this is, and I always say, there's a small percentage of workers these days who have the ability to run a manufacturing line. And because those manufacturing lines are so similar, it doesn't matter whether you make cookies or cars, you can go from one factory to the next. And as long as somebody knows you have some competency running a manufacturing line, you own 80% of those skills it takes to run an automated line or a production line. They're going to teach you the 20. So people will leave a job for 50 cents because whether I'm making cookies or cars, it doesn't matter. I can go down the street and make 50 cents more an hour making a car. And then when the cookie factory figures that out, they're going to pay me 50 cents more to come back, right? So this jumping around thought process is, and I don't know the root cause of it, but I would think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that there is a group of people who know how to run manufacturing lines, and they are just jumping around to get the best bang for their buck. So from a culture standpoint, we have to create a culture where 50 cents doesn't drag somebody away. I want to say I'm going to make up. I'm going to stay for that 50 cents less because I like where I'm working and I know where I'm headed, and those things are important to me.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that, and I love, of course, your correlation to culture there, man. For me, I see part of that root cause is manufacturers stopped doing a lot of training in-house. We started looking for people with 5 to 10 years of experience, but wanting to pay them the pay band of 3 to 5 years or lower, right? In-house training has taken a massive dive over the course of the last 20 years. We used to invest in people to go learn those skills to run a line, right? Now we don't do that. We want people walking in the door manufacturing ready, right? So to counter that, we hire somebody, we hire anybody who can fog a mirror. And this has been going on for the last 10 to 15 years, right? If they've got a heartbeat and 2 hands, we will literally hire them. And then when they come on board, if there's a threat for that 50 cents an hour down the road, we throw money at them. We don't tie performance to pay. We just say, okay, we want to keep you. Here's 75 cents more an hour. And we just keep throwing money at the problem and not addressing that root cause of getting people trained up throughout there. And going back to some of the original points, having that learning pathway for people to create the culture that they do want to stay, to connect the dots for people so they do want to stay.
And maybe where we went wrong in this, and it could be, and I'm just kind of pontificating here, philosophizing a little bit. Back in the day, I'll tell you a story. I was in a chicken plant of all places, chicken poultry plant, and I was doing some leadership training. And one of the guys that was in the leadership training was a mechanic in this training class, and he said, "Let me tell you something." He says, I worked down the road here for 21 years. I ran the aluminum oxide. I ran a smelting process. And there's only 1 or 2 of those in the United States.
Wow.
And I was the guy who could run it. Nobody else knew it as well as I did. That was a great source of pride for me that I was the guy. And that went away. And guess what? There was only one other guy, and he's on the other side of the country, that knows how to run that same process that I did. And so I wasn't going to move across country and take his job. So here I am at the chicken plant today. Like, nobody needed somebody who knew how to do extract aluminum processes in this part of the country. But the pride that guy took in his job, I think we've kind of taken a little bit of that away. Jim will back me up on this, but back in the day, we used to talk about how we don't want somebody to come in and be the knight in shining armor, and we don't want somebody to come in and, That's kind of stripped us a little bit of ownership and a little bit of pride in the work that we do. So, I mean, like I said, I'm just philosophizing and pontificating here a little bit, but that could be, part of the issue is that we've made everything so vanilla ice cream that, people don't have anything to grab on from a pride standpoint anymore.
Well, and I think that, man, I love that point, and I don't think it's just pontification. I think it's your lived experience, and I think that makes it absolutely 100% valid, right? But I think you're really approaching part of that root cause here. The pride that craftspeople have in what they make is a massive part of the drive for people to get into this industry, right? You go talk to any young person in a high school, why are you in a CTE program right now? They are there because they like to make things. They want to show you what they make. 20 years ago, when I was first coming into manufacturing, 25 years ago, whatever it is at this point, I would walk into shops and I'd never been in their shop before. I didn't necessarily know their process. Hey, can you show me around what you guys make? People love to show you what they make, that sense of pride. And I think that what you're getting at is pride is now at a company level and maybe not at that individual level. And so how can companies balance that back out to where, to your earlier point, Eric, the role is defined so that you know exactly what part of the process that you are allowed to be proud of accomplishing, right? When I was in construction, my first boss, he said, know your role, do your job. Don't worry about the guy next to you. Don't worry about the drywaller. You have a job, do it well. And I still, when I am driving around with my family in the neck of woods that I used to build houses in, still point out every single house I was a part of, right? So there's still that sense of pride for me. And I think that we may be onto something here, guys. We may be cracking the code.
It's funny. I was sitting on my deck here, and I look out. I have a great view looking out over the Salt Lake Valley here, and a C-17 flew into Hill Air Force Base, and I mean the first thing that I say when I see a C-17 is, "There's my baby." There's my baby. I mean, I watched that thing go from paperwork to airplane, and there's some serious ownership in that, So
that's so cool.
It is so cool.
Right. So my question is, who's doing it right? Jim, you definitely shared an example in that article you wrote recently, which we will be launching this week in kind of conjunction with this podcast. It's about a similar topic. You mentioned Toyota had some success with this. Is there anyone else? I know you probably want to touch on that. What examples can we look to in the manufacturing industry of, hey, here are some people who are investing in the front line in the right kind of ways, and share some of those success stories? Are there a lot of examples?
Yes. I don't want to paint a picture that everybody's doing this wrong, right? You've got Toyota, of course, and yes, we can talk about that. There are so many. One that really sticks out to me is here in Arizona recently. I've worked with a company called Bent River Machine. This is a family company, smaller organization, under 50 employees. Second generation owners now handle the organization. They brought me in to help them understand their employee engagement levels, help them understand what they were doing wrong, what they were doing right. One of the biggest takeaways from the survey was the employees didn't feel like their pay was being linked to performance. And so we created a performance management process. But as part of that, the ownership really wanted to make sure that the performance management led to continuing education and learning pathways, right? So what we do is we take everything that isn't a 5 on a review, and the manager, the direct supervisor of that employee, has to tell the employee in the comments what they have to do to get from a 3, a 4, or a 2 to that 5. That then becomes the action item for the learning pathway, right? So it makes it one continuous process for these employees. So they're not feeling like they are guessing, what do I need to work on? This is a defined process. The other one that I really love, man, is O'Neill Steel. O'Neill Steel is a company that realized that they looked at the data and they realized that 60% or higher of their employees were leaving within 6 months. They sat down and realized, because they listened to exit interviews, which is a whole nother topic we can cover on another show. But they built this thing called the 180-day experience. It's a structured onboarding and mentorship program that keeps employees past that 6-month phase. Going back to Eric's point earlier, right? They paired their employees with mentors. They checked in weekly instead of, quarterly or biannually or annually. They mapped out career paths from the very beginning of employment so that that employee knew exactly where they were going, what they could be proud of within their world of work. The last data point that we had, that I had from this case study that I read on them, their turnover had dropped 37%. Their internal promotions were there. People were staying. People were moving up. These are choices that people are making, employers are making to keep employees around. And that's what manufacturers have to do. That's what any leader needs to do. Yeah. I don't care what industry you're in. That's what every industry needs to do. Every leader needs to do is we need to connect those dots for employees. We need to make them want to stay. And those efforts have to be intentional. They can't just be, the latest buzzword that they hear on, a podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Chris, I think for us at L2L, I think, and I'll just be short with this, is that, and people can go to our website, I think there's the case study out there with Keith Holloman at Geldwin down in Dotson, Louisiana. And Keith spoke at our conference this year and talked about that. Because they're solving problems, because they're removing, people know that things can be solved. And if you're solving them, they're willing to kind of play along. We're getting better. I like this. I want to stick around. But I think the statistic that kind of really stands out for me about somebody that's doing it correctly is that Keith, as the plant manager, has a waiting list of people in the community that want to come to work for his plant. The other thing is that he's having to build a new parking lot to accommodate all these people that want to come work for him, right? So very, very innocuous type of things to look at. But those two things, I have a waiting list of people wanting to come work for this plant, and I have to build a new parking lot to accommodate them all.
Sounds like he now needs to go with a carpool program. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes. Yeah, but there are things that are indicators that you're doing it right. I would say that those are a couple of them. You know what I mean? So...
And that's kind of a good tie into my next question, which is, we've talked about some of the things that are working, right? We've talked about leadership. We've talked about real opportunities for growth. We're talking about leveraging reviews to make learning a real opportunity and something that actually sticks and really propels that career development. I have to ask this because we are ultimately in the business of tech, right? We're heavily invested in the world of manufacturing tech as a resource for the front line, not just something for manufacturers to buy, not for something that you need to invest in to increase ROI, but because I believe, and I think we all believe, that these are opportunities to do exactly what you're saying, which is make life at the front line easier, remove those headaches and remove those barriers for entry. Do you agree with that tech is kind of one of the ways that we can level that playing field for the front line?
I think that the technology is only as good as the source that it comes from, right? I think that some of Industry 4.0's failures, 3.0's failures have come from this concept of top-down leadership, right? And management truly driving technology down to the floor instead of management going to the floor and saying, here's our problem. How do we address it? Going back to Eric's point, people are jumping jobs. And so somebody's bound to have seen a technology solution that has worked for them in a previous role. So how are we empowering our employees to bring the solutions that they truly need to the table, instead of management who has in some cases not been on the floor in 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Or ever in some cases. Why are we letting management drive those solutions, right? So, I've seen a lot of different platforms work when it comes to this. They all are around communication. They're around making lives easier. But I'm going to go back to my point. Most importantly, it's all about what does that individual floor need, right?
Yeah.
Because each floor is going to have different needs based on the humans that are working there. And if you want to build the culture that Eric was talking about, go ask them their opinions. They'll be the best resource for an owner to develop that.
Yeah, man, I've had some fantastic conversations in the last few weeks, both with a guy named Jason Antoine, who's another culture expert, and David Rogers, he's into AI, machine learning. He's an expert on that kind of stuff. And I asked them both a similar question, right? Is like, how do we make tech work for the people who's using it every day? And same answer: is go talk to them, get your feet on the line, walk around, connect with them on a human level, and start building that from the bottom up.
So kind of on that line from a tech standpoint, one of the things that we've seen lately, and this is really, I think this is kind of something new within manufacturing. I was at a trade show this week, and one of the comments that I made is that finally people are coming up and asking us about the connected worker, as opposed to us having to teach them about the connected worker, right? Yeah. This is becoming something, there really is this new level of software out on the shop floor that people are not used to seeing. It's something new, and I say the reason why that is because finally everybody has Wi-Fi. Finally, there's this thing called the cloud, and finally there's this thing called tablets, right? Mobile devices. Yeah. Those three things have led to this new piece of software out on the shop floor called the Connected Worker Platform. And what that does is that sets structure to the processes. Back to my thought process about processes and leadership, or the outcome of that is culture. So if you can technologically set processes where it's easy for people to follow a good standard a good standard process, and then you encourage them to do that from a leadership standpoint, yeah, tech plays a big part in the culture, because you're fulfilling that process problem. Yeah. There's no ambiguity about what you should be doing or what is the right thing to do, because it's all right there at their fingertips now,
Do you think that confidence plays a big role in this kind of relationship between tech and the frontline worker in an industry like manufacturing? Do we see that knowing what you're supposed to be doing, having these clear process, makes people more confident? And do you think that confident people are more likely to stay in these kind of jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's the other side of that is confidence in the technology as well, yeah. Right? If I know that I can turn to that technology and get the answer to the question that I need, then I'm way more likely to use it. I always use the analogy of the Waze app, right? Everybody loves using the Waze app. As I'm driving down the road, I'm getting and putting in information into this app.
Yeah.
And the more data I put into it, the more confident that I'm going to get better data out of it, and it's going to help me more. And so that same thought process is working on the shop floor too when it comes to technology, is that I know that the more people that are involved in this process, the more confident I can feel about the data I'm getting out. And so, that is really something that will help me kind of move forward, especially as we move into this next generation of AI capabilities. And, L2L has this process where we now have chat inside, and you can chat with the AI. Well, that all comes from the amount of data you put in from your organization and the amount of feedback of people interacting with the system. You're going to get more and more correct and viable answers from the AI to help you in your day, so.
And real quick, Chris, I think that, confidence comes from natively using it, right? And so we've now got at least 3, sometimes 4 generations in the workforce, right? In manufacturing, we've got the baby boomer, the Gen Xers, we've got the Ys or the millennials, we've got Gen Z. We might even have some older Gen Alphas now. So maybe 5 generations in the workforce, right? Those 3 younger generations have grown up with this technology, kind of technology capability in their hand, right? And so their confidence level is going to be a lot different. And that's where I find reverse mentorship programs being a massive key to success in some of these shops that still have an aging workforce, still have those baby boomers on the floor because they have to have them for that skill set and that knowledge that they have. But if we are able to connect them with somebody of a younger generation who is comfortable with that tablet, with the Wi-Fi, with the cloud, and those kinds of terminology, then they're able to teach that older person within the shop how to use this technology, so then we can capture their knowledge within whatever platform, whatever database we're capturing that in, to then teach future generations and get them up to speed. It's this really cool cycle if it's used correctly.
Absolutely. That feedback loop, that capturing of that silent knowledge, I think Willemijn has a fantastic quote about at Friday at 5 p.m., like 90% of your company's knowledge walks out the front door.
Right.
I don't know if it's 90%, but it's that huge portion of knowledge that's living in people's heads. And I think these kind of solutions give us an opportunity to capture that and to share it with the people who need to use it.
Absolutely.
I got one more thing I want to touch on today, and that is, what do you think the realistic trajectory is if we don't correct this trend of turnover in a meaningful way? I don't want to go doom and gloom with it, but what do you think the next 5 years look like if we don't intervene and rethink the way that we're kind of investing in this Frontline as a human resource and a really important component?
Eric, go ahead.
Well, I mean, all we have to do is look behind us. All we have to do is look at the path that we're on, right? Where were we 10 years ago? Where were we 15 years ago? And then project that out in front of us. And it's obvious that what we're going to be in is this rock and a hard place where we are constantly trying to solve this problem. And the problem with trying to constantly solve a problem is that you seem to iterate small stopgap measures, right? We've got to have more automation. We've got to have easier jobs for people to do. Whatever it is that we're trying to use in order to go solve this problem, all of those things continue to lead to the problem as well. And so we've kind of have to tackle it at its root cause, at its base. And so, I'm pretty confident. We've been talking about this for a year and a half, 2 years now straight, that this is an issue. And I actually think there is some data that the skill gap is still there, but the availability of workers is starting to ease a little bit. We're starting to be able to fill some of those positions. So hopefully that as we talk about it, as we do things at the lower levels and understand this is a problem, we're starting to solve those problems. One thing I've always said is that I just don't ever understand why the greatest problem-solving industry in the world, manufacturing, doesn't turn and solve this problem with the same methodologies that we solve every other problem we have, right? Absolutely. We can't just turn towards HR and go, solve this problem. We have the ability to, that's what we do. We literally solve problems all the time. Let's just go solve this problem. So,
yeah, fantastic.
Well, dang, man, I should have gone first because that was the answer. Now, anything I say...
get out of here.
That was awesome, though. I think that, I think a lot of what you talk about is spot on, Eric. I think that we have historically had that skills gap, and we talked about it at the top of the show, that we've known about this for a long time. We haven't really addressed it from a standpoint of turnover. I think that we are starting to do that. My fear is we've done such a great job of going to trade schools, going to high schools, building that pipeline, but we've been making a promise of 60K out of trade school, right? And I think as we start to fill that pipeline more, the law of supply and demand is going to make it so that that promise of that level of salary post trade school is not going to be a reality anymore, because we're going to have enough skilled workers that it's going to normalize. And maybe that's where we tackled the pay topic that I talked about a little bit earlier in a future episode. I think that we have to set more realistic expectations. Where we go in the future is really up to us. Eric nailed it on the head with his comment, and I'm not going to do it justice, so I'm not even going to repeat it. But I think that we have to do this with intentionality. We have to do this with the humans in mind that are in this industry. We have to empower them to select that technology that we are using moving forward. And we have to address some of the more systemic issues that have faced this industry, right? We talk about skills gap, but let's talk about offshoring. What led to that skills gap? What, the generational trauma that came from offshoring, the pay gap, the dream gap, the inequity in finding people of diverse backgrounds.
Yeah, definitely. And unfortunately, we are at time. But once again, thank you so much, Jim and Eric, for joining us this week. And thank you all for listening to another episode of the Manufacturing Stream podcast. We will catch you soon with another episode and another guest and another topic about how to engage and empower the front line with better resources, better tech, and better strategies. So until next time, see ya.